Well, greetings. Welcome once again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining us today. Bob Henrit is a legendary British drummer who has kept time and rhythm with many bands and artists over the years. He may best be known for his time with the band Argent from 1969 to 1976, and then again for reunion shows in 2010, 12, and 13. Earlier in his career, during the 60s, Bob was in the Roulettes and Unit 4+2. Mr. Henrit replaced Mick Avory of the Kinks in 1984 and played with the band until 1996. Bob has worked as a session musician for a number of artists, including Roger Daltrey, Davies, and Ian Matthews. 2013 saw the release of Bob's memoir, Banging On. The writing bug must have bit Mr. Henrit, as he recently has collaborated with Nigel Constable on a couple of books, the Hayman Drum Book, and just this year, Crash Bang Wallop. Hopefully, we'll find out more about these in our upcoming conversation. Well, welcome, Bob.
Hello.
Thank you for joining me today. And
You're welcome.
You're
welcome, Greg.
Out of your schedule. I appreciate that. Well, let's go back to the beginning. Where were you born? And talk about some childhood memories.
Okay, I was born in North London, a place called Waltham Cross, which turned out to be, believe it or not, a real hotbed of music. It was only a small area, but almost it seems that everybody who came from there made it. Anybody who was a musician made it, and we were very much part of the scene of it was a boys' club, and called Cheshunt Boys Club, and we all rehearsed there. We all met there. We all had fun there, and from there we spread out and joined people like Adam Faith and Cliff Richard and the stars of the day. And that was the beginning of it. And for me, I don't know if you know about skiffle, but there was a style of music called skiffle, which had been propagated by a chap called Lonnie Donegan.
Lonnie Donegan, yes.
Yeah. Well, Lonnie invented it, or if he didn't have invented, he adapted it. And we all took it up, and it wasn't difficult to play, and anybody could do it more or less, and you didn't have to be any good at it. But if you were good at it, that was another thing. And so having mastered the washboard, which was the alternative to a drum kit, nobody had a drum kit then, this is mid-50s. So having mastered the washboard, within 5 years, I was playing at the Palladium, London Palladium, which is a very, very famous theatre. And I was playing in front of what we used to call the crowned heads of Europe. So that was the beginning, and the next thing I knew, I was off on the road, and my first flight was to Australia, believe it or not, which and for somebody who had only just got a passport and was on the very first plane, which was heading for Australia, which is ridiculous, but that's how it began for me, and I was very lucky, and I enjoyed it and still enjoy it. Being on the road, to me, is very important. And certainly when I was with Don McLean, I have it on good authority. We went to places that American musicians don't go. And like a place called Dewey, Oklahoma, which is a real Wild West town. And it's got a really wide, it's got a very, very wide main street, so that a wagon pulled by oxen can do a U-turn, believe it or not. And so, because of course in a wagon, you certainly you couldn't back up and then move forward and back up and move forward. So that was part of a tour where we went everywhere, and it was fabulous. And for me, that's the most important thing. I would look out of the coach window, and there'd be a horizon at the front, a horizon at the back, a horizon at the sides, and that's what I'd be seeing. And I'd be intently watching what was going on. And I never saw anything. But the reason I didn't see anything is because there's not much to see when you're going across the prairies. But I wanted to see. And so it was like I was trapped in North by Northwest. I don't know if you know that film, but it's where the crop spraying plane
yes.
comes down on Cary Grant. Anyway, so I was part of that, and I was enjoying it. And so that was by no manner of means the first thing I ever did. That was 1981, I think.
I think, Bob, I take it that you were a fan when you were younger of cowboy movies.
Well, yeah, everybody was. We had what we called Saturday morning pictures. So, but it was a cinema show specifically for little kids on Saturday morning. I think about 9:30 it started, and we'd all be crammed into the cinema, and we'd be watching Roy Rogers and the Sons of the Pioneers and all that, and space films at the time. And that was how we all got off on the whole visual thing. Yeah. But I mean, yes, I somehow I knew things about cowboys. And when I joined Don McLean, he said, "Do you know about cowboys?" I said, "Well, no, not like you do, Don," because Don had written plenty of songs about cowboys. And he said, "Do you know what Tom Mix's horse's name was?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And he was astonished. And he was just so surprised that some English kid would know this. And so anyway, he taught me lots about the whole thing. I mean, I knew how Tom Mix had died. I don't know if you know how he died. We don't know anything about flash floods over in England, but you guys over there do. And a flash flood will take out the side of the road. And if you're driving along in a car, it'll take you out as well. And that's what happened to Don McLean, who was on his way to Hollywood, not Don McCain, sorry, to Tom Mix, who was on his way to Hollywood. And the flash flood came, and he had a Halliburton briefcase in the back of his car, which came forward and bashed him on the head. And that was the end of it, except that in the Tom Mix Museum where we went, there's a Halliburton briefcase with a dent in the corner, which we assume was where it hit Tom Mix on the head. So I've been, you wouldn't know this, Greg, but I've been scribbling all this down for all my career. And so there are 2 books that are coming out in the fullness of time. And the problem is when to stop them. Because if I'm still on the road, I want to keep writing down and talking about not the big picture, but the small pictures. The fact that we went to Texas and all of that stuff is, for me, it's important. And of course, the same thing goes for drums. I'm hugely interested in drums and always have been. And I mean, I used to have, this is just excess beyond belief. I had 35 drum sets in the loft of my house. But and to make matters worse, I had 55 snare drums in the loft. And there was so much weight up there that I assumed, or I figured, that eventually the roof was going to fall in and all these drums would be downstairs in the living room or the kitchen, wherever they ended. But it didn't happen.
No, we didn't
want that. In your introduction, you didn't mention Ringo.
Ringo, yes.
I made an album with Ringo.
Yes, you did.
Which is rather surprising.
Yes. How did that go? Talk a little bit about
that? Was absolutely brilliant. I mean, I knew him from before because the Roulettes were, believe it or not, around before the Beatles. So eventually we began to bump into one another, and he used me on an album, and and I had a drum shop at the time, and he while we were recording, he said he wanted to get a drum kit for one of his sons. I don't know whether it was Zach, but it was one of his sons, and he came into the shop which was called Henrit's Drum Store. Came in and bought a drum kit. He bought a Yamaha drum kit and loads of cymbals. It was probably for Zach, but it might not have been. So anyway, I made an album with him, and what you wouldn't know is that once he gets to know you, he doesn't want you to call him Ringo. He wants you to call him Richie.
Oh.
So, and now the interesting thing is, most of my American drumming pals don't want to call him Richie. They want to call him Ringo. And so I spoke to, anyway, it's just one of those things, and we made an album, and it was great fun. Yeah. And
he was good to work with.
He's a very nice guy, and an exceedingly good drummer. Whatever anybody says, he is the man. And
yeah.
there are films on, I think, somewhere on the internet where he's playing drums, and these people elsewhere are playing along with him. I can't remember which song it is, a Beatles song. And so people join him in different places, but they're all part of the same song. And Richie really is a good player. And hearing what he's doing, he's the best Ringo Starr player in the world, in the same way that Charlie Watts was the greatest Charlie Watts drummer in the world.
Right. Well, he was perfect for the Beatles. I mean, he was just right for the Beatles. No matter what criticism people throw at him, he was perfect for the Beatles.
Well, you could, yeah, absolutely. But you can say that about Mooney. You can say that about a great many people who made the music by the way they played. They made the band's music, and it became no longer 5 musicians and a drummer. That was gone, and the drummer, a good drummer, would make a hell of a difference.
That's right. They would shape the sound of the band. Help shape it. Yeah. Well, go back. Do you remember what bands that you were into as a teenager before you started playing? Actually, remember?
Yeah, we were learning from. We were learning from American drummers, but we obviously we were listening to Elvis Presley. That's what we heard, and we were listening to a whole bunch of drummers who were making hit records. We didn't know who they were, but Jerry Allison was a drummer with oh gosh, hang on. Jerry Allison was with the Crickets, and he was teaching us stuff that we didn't know, and we would never have picked it up because we didn't have TV then. Well, we did have TV, but the chances of seeing music and rock and roll music on TV were absolutely nil. So we would listen to what we heard from America, and we would adapt it. We think we knew how to play it, but nobody had shown us how to play it. And for example, the one that we all got wrong was Peggy Sue. Okay. And that was Jerry Allison. And Peggy Sue, actually, everybody thought that it was just hammering away on the floor tom, and 1 Eana, 2 Eana, 3 Eana, 4 Eana, but it wasn't. What Jerry Allison was playing was paradiddles from around the toms and back to the snare drum. And us guys in England, Jerry Allison was a school drummer, but us guys in England probably didn't know about a paradiddle, and if we did, it wasn't. We didn't know how to adapt it. Yeah, it just wasn't. We hadn't worked out how to do it. And when I finally saw Jerry Allison and the Crickets we did a gig in the Albert Hall in 1962, maybe, and I saw how you play it, and we've been playing it all wrong completely. But often we got it wrong, and then we sent it back to you guys, and you guys loved it because it was these weird kids with weird accents playing music and sending it back. And at the time, it was believed in America that every English group came from Liverpool. Well, which of course was like suggesting that every American group came from New York. Lots of them did, but lots of them didn't. So that was how it was the British invasion that we started. And the British invasion was because of what we were getting wrong rather than what we were getting right. I've spoken to Steve Smith about this, and it's an interesting subject because you guys were listening to what we were doing, and so I mean the whole thing in the end was but like Chinese whispers, and we were playing it wrong, sending it back to you guys, and you would get it wrong and send it back to us guys. So it was a cleft stick, but we had a wonderful time. And that music, I mean, we of course we all listened to Elvis, and well, anything rock and roll, because what we had over here was dance band music, which was music for grown-ups to get close together when they're on a dance floor. Well, that wasn't anything like Elvis, and certainly most of dance band music was four on the floor, and we didn't want to do that. We heard this whole rocker shake thing, boom, cha cha, boom, boom, cha cha, boom, cha cha, boom, boom, cha, that sort of thing. And we thought, oh, this is great. And Eddie Cochran came across. And he was a drummer. We didn't know that at the time, but he actually propagated something. It's a feel that goes boom, ba boom, 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 ba boom, and on the bass drum. And it at the time it wasn't easy to play, but it was actually. It wasn't invented, but it was adapted by Eddie Cochran. But big band drummers used to play it. They'd be playing dang 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 ba ba ba. So it would have dotted notes against it, and it was that was the beginnings for us. And then we started thinking, well, we can do this, and people started asking us to make records, and the rest, of course, is history.
Let me ask you, was Buster, Michael, and the Daybreakers your first band?
Well, no. The Roulettes were my first band. I was in the Roulettes skiffle. It was a skiffle group.
Okay, and that was before. Okay.
Buster Beagle came along later on, but there were several. I mean, we were in and out of bands, and if one of the band's drummers couldn't make it, then I'd go, or one of the other guys from the boys club would go, and we would play at American bases, where we weren't old enough to be there. We certainly weren't old enough to drink there, and we had to hide in the van when we arrived at the camp, the US camp.
Okay.
And there'd be people in the audience who we didn't know were going to be successful. Like I think Jerry Allison was actually in the audience at one of these officers' clubs at an Air Force base.
Okay, interesting. Well, I know that Russ Ballard and you followed each other around from group to group to group. Was like you must have been attached at the hip.
It was very like that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we fed off each other, and it was a great time. And we did TV shows. We did lots of recording for other people, and we never knew who it was going to be. Unit, we did know a bit about Unit 4+2, and I don't know if you remember Concrete and Clay, but it was a huge hit around the world, and we got paid £5, 15 shillings and sixpence. Now there were probably $4 to the pound then, so So that's probably $20 to make a multi-million selling record. But what I was trying to say is we didn't care. We wanted to make records. We wanted to make music. We wanted to have fun. And the £5, 15 shillings and sixpence was absolutely immaterial. It didn't matter. We wanted to play, and we wanted to get out on the road, which was another thing. So we started in music, and 60 years later, Russell and I are still doing it and enjoying it, of course. And it's in the blood. That's it. And
right. If it's in the blood, you have to do it. I understand that. Well, tell us real quick, going back a little bit, who was Harry Webb?
Right, Harry Webb was Cliff Richard. Okay. Harry Webb was my next door neighbor when I was growing up. He was 8 and I was 6. Okay. And he was my next door neighbor, and he went on to be Cliff Richard, who was certainly in Britain the biggest thing since sliced bread. And he was, I mean, this is cruel, but if he was anything, he was an Elvis Presley impersonator. But he had his own stuff, his own thing that he wanted to do. And so Harry Webb was my next door neighbor, and he was also a member of the boys club. He also went to school with my sister, and he also went to school, I'll get to the point now, with Buster Meikle. Buster Meikle was in our first group, which was the Daybreakers, and then he decided, then he was in Unit 4+2. And we started making, well, we did all their records, me and Russell. And then eventually we joined them for a little while we were waiting for Argent to come together and to be ready to go on the road, which we were. So but before we went on the road, we went to Germany with Argent to do 9 45-minute spots a night. And that was for a month. So now 9 45-minute spots a night is like, I always say, it's like being down the mines, only harder. But if you like it, if that's what you want to do, then you're never going to get better experience than that. And if you want to find out, Greg, where the offbeat can sit and where it makes the most difference and takes you in a different direction, then 9 45-minute spots a night will teach you. So it really was a baptism of fire, and it didn't do us any harm at all.
Well, very good. Well, going back to Unit 4+2, I wanted to mention I like the band's version of the Bee Gees' Butterfly. That was always been one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's we of course we were writing our own songs, but up until the Beatles, the groups didn't write their own songs, and they didn't do it in America either. Right. You know, there was I don't know if you know about the Brill Building. The Brill Building's a building in New York, which is full of music publishers, and there are dozens of pianos in this particular building where guys would get together and write songs. So they'd wake up one morning and think, right, we're going to write a song today, and they'd go to the office, sit at the piano, and they would make a hit record. Yeah. And that was how it was done. So Carole King started doing that.
It was like Tin Pan Alley.
It was, yeah.
And
Tin Pan Alley was Tin Pan. Well, we had a Tin Pan Alley, but it came from you guys in New York.
Yes, Denmark Street.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
Yeah, yes, that was your version.
Yeah.
Well, another track I wanted to mention from the later years of Unit 4+2 and ask if you played on this track was "You Ain't Going Nowhere." Do you remember? Did you play on that?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it's Bob Dylan, and it's the well-known double negative.
Yeah, right.
Ain't going nowhere. Your teacher would hate it, but Bob Dylan, that's what Bob Dylan did. So we made, yes, that was fun. Interestingly enough, that was the very session where I met my wife. which
Wow.
was in, I think it was 1967, probably. She was in the studio, and the rest is history.
Yeah. Did you overall did you enjoy your experience in Unit 4+2?
Yeah, I mean, we made records. It wasn't a slow process, and sometimes there'd be an orchestra with us, which when I was with Don McLean, he had just had a hit with "Crying Around the World," which had an orchestra on it, and he decided he wanted to go on the road with an orchestra and a rock band, and so everybody had to read music, which is I can read music, but I can tell you, I've never actually said I can read music when I can't. You know, it's you're going to get caught out and you're going to look like an idiot. So that Don McLean tour, we had to read music, and the same with anything to do with an orchestra. You had to be able to read music. Interestingly.
Yeah. You just couldn't shake off Russ Ballard, and you guys
No.
followed each other. When did you and Russ come into the orbit of ex-zombie Rod Argent? When did you?
Yeah, okay. We were doing a gig with Unit 4+2,
Mhm.
and it was somewhere in Essex, which is probably not far outside of London, and it was in a dance hall. And I looked out into the audience and I thought, that looks like Rod Argent there, and that geezer with him looks like Chris White, who were the Zombies, of course, as you said. And afterwards, they came up to us and they said, "What are you up to now?" I said, "Well, we're doing Unit 4+2." He said, "Well, we're putting a group together. Do you want to be in it?" And to me and Russell, so we decided, and Jim Rodford was in the audience, so we decided we were going to go and listen to the songs to see what they had to offer. And the songs were absolutely splendid, really, really good songs. And we decided, yeah, we didn't even decide, there was no decision. We just joined Argent. Next thing we knew, we were in Germany. And the next thing after that, we were on an American tour.
Yeah.
And that American tour was our very first tour, where we were on 51 planes in 50 days, which that's what it was like in the late 70s. No, hang on, the late 60s. What am I talking about? And so we were just rushing around everywhere, and that was what we wanted.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned.
So Russell,
Yeah,
sorry, go.
No, I was going to say, you mentioned Chris White. I think I like most of the songs that he wrote for the Zombies. I think I really have an affinity for the tracks that he wrote. So, and I know, but also Rod's songs are great too. I think the Zombies are right up there. They're probably my top 5, or maybe better, of all bands of all times. The Zombies.
Well,
yeah.
She's Not There for interest's sake had some things going on it from Rod that nobody had ever done before. You know, nobody had ever put that sort of solo, that sort of keyboard solo on a record. It just hadn't happened, not on a single anyway, that's for sure. And we all started making records with other people, and Colin Blunston was one of those. But of course, Colin had been in the Zombies anyway. Yeah. So we just went ahead and did what we did, and we went to so many countries, and as I said earlier, we really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, it seems like Rod, maybe he felt a little bit trapped into that style, that Baroque pop style, and he wanted to go more in a progressive.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that was exactly, that's why we were there.
Yeah, yeah.
And,
but
and on the same note, that's what Ray Davies wanted to do. He wanted to get, he wanted to move the Kinks along to something, to go in another direction. And he he didn't necessarily want to do things in 4/4 all the time.
Yeah.
So Jim and I were eventually in the Kinks, and the story of how, if you're interested, of how we met Ray, is we were doing a gig not too far from in North London, and again I looked out. I was in a rhythm and blues band, which was absolutely fabulous. It was a great band, and there were 10 of us, which meant there was never going to be much money in it because there were 10 of you, but it was easy to divide how much you were going to get. So we were happily playing, and I looked out in the audience and I thought, that looks like Ray Davies. And it turned out it was Ray, and Ray came over and said, what are you up to now? And I said, well, what have you got? And that sort of response. And he said, well, we're making a record. We want you to play on it. So I said, well, I'd love to, but what's happening with Mick? He said, oh, Mick's not playing on this one. Anyway, so time went by, and we were in the studios a lot. And I was offered something outside of that. I can't remember who it was. It was a tour. And I phoned up Ray. I said, Ray, have you finished with me in the studio yet? He said, because I've been offered a tour. He said, you can't tour with anybody else. You're in the Kinks now. So that was the first that I knew I was in the Kinks. And within less than a week, we were in America doing a tour. So those things happen, and they're very, they're great fun. And I'm going to have to use the word blessed, but I've been blessed with doing some absolutely, truly great gigs.
Yeah. Well, going back to Argent, do you recall how the recording sessions went typically? Or did they, as far as like, who was the producer that you worked with?
Oh, well, it was Chris White.
Chris, okay.
Yeah, but and Rod together. But we would rehearse before we went into the studio. There was a time when people didn't do that. They'd go and they'd work on the song while they were in the studio, which is it's hugely expensive and not a good idea. But people did do that. But we'd rehearse it elsewhere, and then we go to the studio, and because it was progressive music, it would be changing as we played it. But we knew all the nuts and bolts. We knew where the music was going before we got to the studio. But we were actually finishing Hold Your Head Up when the moon landing happened.
Right.
So we can remember that day because we were finishing the album. So time went by, and we made more and more albums, more and more, and we did more and more gigs, and we did more and more tours, and we were absolutely enjoying ourselves.
Well, I wanted to mention a few tracks during the Argent years and just get your take, maybe some background info or what you remember about the songs. An early one off the first album, Schoolgirl, is one of my favorites.
All right.
Russell wrote that one, right?
That's a Russell song, yeah. Yeah.
You know what?
I don't know.
It sounds like a Zombies track. It really does, especially Rod's keyboard playing and the vocals.
Yeah, well, that was inevitable. I mean, what you want to do, if you can, as a musician, is be yourself and always recognize yourself. I mean, Rod is recognizable.
Right.
And I'd like to think that at the time I was recognizable, and Russell is, of course, and Jim Rodford was. Yeah. I mean, we were rushing around the world, and we were playing every night, and we did more American tours than we had hot dinners, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, right.
But that was what we did, and that's what any band did. You know, Pink Floyd did that. The Moody Blues, that's what we were doing. That's what we were good at.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, I'll jump ahead to that. You mentioned Pink Floyd. The same year, 1973, you guys came out with It's Only Money. And interestingly, they had the song Money on
Yeah,
on the Dark Side of the Moon the same year. I
yeah,
thought, you know, money was on everybody's mind. It still is.
still is, I guess.
Right. Well, yeah, of course, Liar is a great track, and then later covered by Three Dog Night.
It
Um,
was, yeah.
I wondered if Rod might have borrowed slightly from Three Dog Night on the piano intro to Pleasure, the track Pleasure, because
Yeah, sure.
it sounds a lot like Black and White, the Three Dog Night, Black and White. If you listen to the
Yeah,
beginning
yeah.
piano of that, it sounds like maybe they were like trading off a little bit there.
Well, somebody once said that there are only 8 notes, and the order that you get them in is what makes something of it.
Uh-huh.
So I mean, I know that Andrew Lloyd Webber won't listen to anybody else's songs. If somebody sends a demo into him, he won't listen to it. He doesn't want to be accused of copying.
Yeah.
And so, and as you know, there are only 8 notes. It's just the way you arrange them that makes it happen. I hope there are only eight notes.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Of course, "Hold Your Head Up" is still a staple on rock music stations and always will be. I think it's the
Yeah,
guitar. I think Russ's guitar on that. What did he do? Do you remember how he treated that? Or
yeah,
that's what?
yeah. He had a sixpence, which
Okay.
was it's smaller than a quarter,
Uh-huh.
and he used that as a plectrum,
Okay.
and it had a serrated edge, and he just sort of rubbed it up and down the strings, and it made that sound. But
Yeah.
if you're interested how Hold Your Head Up began,
Yeah.
we're doing it was part of the 9 45-minute spots a night thing that we were doing in Germany, and we for the first of the 9:45, there would be very few people interested in the music, whereas there were girls in the club who were, as far as the men were concerned, were the reason that they were there. But anyway, so when we realized that they weren't listening to us in the first set, we just played what we liked, and we started off with Dimples, da 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 da, just sort of a 2/4 version, and then after a few minutes, we would change it, and I would start playing. It could be 6/8, it could be 12/8, it could be 5/4, it could be a shuffle, it could be anything, and we would all follow one another. It was a very intuitive thing, and from what we were doing, Hold Your Head Up came along, and I always thought that I had stolen it. That dum dee dee dum dee dee dum dee dee dum, but the pushed off beat,
Yeah.
and I thought, well, I must have heard it somewhere, and I began looking for it. I couldn't find it anywhere. That doesn't exist, so that one's evidently down to me. But it came because we were just noodling really for the first act, but from it came a lot of interesting things, just to see how far you could push the envelope. And I spoke to Cozy Powell. I was interviewing him for a film, and I spoke to him. I said, "So what are you? Did you do 9 45-minute spots a night in Germany?" He said, "Yeah, of course." I said, "What did you think?" He said, "I loved it." I said, "It was never too much for you?" He said, if 9 45-minute spots a night were too much for you, then you're never going to make 12-hour recording sessions, and you'll be in the wrong business." So that was Cozy's take on it, and he was absolutely right.
It was a good training ground for you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah.
Well, "God Gave Rock and Roll to You" is one of the great rock anthems, I have to say. I've never seen the band. I told you, I've never seen Argent live, never saw them live, but I imagine everyone in the audience singing with their Bic lighters,
Oh,
kind of
absolutely, yes,
kind of
yeah,
doing
yeah,
this, right? 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 Is that what happened?
absolutely,
Right.
yeah.
Right. You have any stories about that song?
Yeah, I think I have. I hope I'm not getting this wrong, but Russell used to be at the back of the stage, and when it came to the arpeggio, da, 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 he would be walking forward towards the audience, and
Okay.
nobody had scoped out the stage to see that it had a lip in it. It actually had a step, and
Oh.
it wasn't marked. So Russell is walking forward, da, 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 and he went down the step. His guitar fell off onto the ground, and we had to start again.
No.
But nobody cared.
Every, Everybody was high in the audience, right? They didn't, they didn't
Well,
care.
we didn't know anything about that. The audience, they weren't just high; they were lying on the floor.
Uh-huh.
And we did both Fillmore West and Fillmore East, and people were just lying on the floor. And when we were at Fillmore East, there was a bomb scare, and everybody had to leave the building, including us. So we're all standing outside on the pavement with the punters, and until they'll let us back in again. And 3,000 people left the hall when the bomb scare happened, and 5,000 people came back. So I don't know how they did this, because it was long before mobile phones. So I began to think that they had a bomb scare every month or so. So they could, and everybody would be standing outside knowing it was going to happen. Because of course the fire department wouldn't be able to make a decision about whether it was a hoax or not. You know, if there was a fire, or there was allegedly a fire, they had to do something about it. And there's another one where Russell had a guitar with holes in it. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called the Holy Guitar. It's a Fender, and somebody, or one of my pals, bored a lot of holes in it. So Russell could put his hand in it, wave it around his head when it was feeding back, throw it up in the air and catch it, and I would then close the door, having already built a shed at the same time as the music was going, the guitar. And so he threw it up in the air, and we were at Fillmore East, and they had Joe's lights, who were the best lights, and but they didn't know the show. They didn't know that, for example, when Russell threw his guitar up in the air, they had to, if they turned the lights out, then they had to switch them back on again very quickly. And they didn't switch them back on again. And we all knew there was a guitar in the air, but nobody could see it. It was pitch black. And so we're all ducking, and it came down on Russell. And it shouldn't be funny, but it is. And Variety had a headline which was Ballard Ben Speak.
Uh-huh.
And
Okay.
so that was so there are loads of stories like that, of course.
Yeah. Well, one more track, Thunder and Lightning. That's a great rocker. Yeah, and I love Russ's vocals in the chorus. You know, I mean, he really does a great job with that one.
Yep.
Not long ago, I picked up a CD copy of a twofer, two albums from the band Phoenix. Okay.
Oh yes, okay.
Yeah. You and Jim, with John Verity on vocals.
John Verity, yeah, huh? Yep.
Yeah. And it had the 76 album plus the follow-up In Full View.
Oh yes.
Do you remember the song From the Ashes? I like that from the first album. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, there's a video of that somewhere on YouTube. There's always one somewhere on YouTube, and it was great to play. I think did I have a gong? I think I had a gong to hit, and I know.
Yeah, I think so.
I think there was a 28-inch bass drum as well that had to be, an orchestral bass drum. Then I think I hit it once. We were discussing today about everybody had, in those days, everybody had a gong, everybody. And you would probably hit it once. And if you were in a band without a roadie or a drum tech, then you wouldn't have a gong. You didn't want to carry a gong and a gong stand.
Oh no.
But everybody had one, and you always hit it. Well, they only hit it once.
Well, Jim Rodford, he wasn't on the second album. He played on the first, but not on the second. I noticed that. Where did he go after that? What happened?
He didn't go anywhere. Eventually, he joined the Kinks, but not he. Oh yeah, got it. Sorry, yes, he wasn't.
Right.
We went to America to do it. Yeah, we did it in Cherokee in LA, and we went out. We stayed in Oakwood Apartments, which was where people who were coming into LA to do a record or do a film would live. Mm-hmm. And it was a splendid place, and it became packed with people at the weekend. You know, pleasure seekers. We'd know we had to go into the studio, so we couldn't have laying by the pool, you know, that sort of thing, twisting by the pool. Yeah, we couldn't do that. So that was, yeah, Jim didn't play on that because I think he was getting ready to join the Kinks. Jim joined the Kinks before I did.
Or you did. Okay. Well, talk some about that. You mentioned that earlier about your stint with the Kinks. I judge by being as long as you were in that till '96 that you enjoyed it.
Oh, it was great. It was Ray would trust me, and Don McLean would trust me. He'd just play a song, and with McLean, he would play a song, and it would be a Presley, or it would be one of the obvious people. Whereas Ray would play a Kinks song that I'd never played before. I mean, because when I joined them, there had been 25 years of or something like 20 years worth of Kinks songs, so nobody could possibly remember them all except for Ray and Dave. So Ray would play Lola, and at that time he would stop the band, but I would keep going. So I'd be playing boom ba boom ba, and Ray would shout to the audience Lola, and the audience would shout back Lola, and Ray. I would be trusted to keep the whole thing going, and it was like there could be 10,000 or 20,000 people, and I would be in charge of those people just by playing boof, daff, boof, da. I was just playing ordinary rhythm, and I could manipulate them, and that really was. A real musical moment for me, and I used to enjoy it. And of course, by this time, the lights would have been shone on the audience, not on the band, or not only on the band. And everybody have their arms above their heads. And I realized just by adjusting what I was playing, I could actually change how the audience moved.
Well, let me ask you this. Did you ever in your career do one of those epic 10-minute drum solos? You know,
every night.
Okay.
I did one every night, but it wasn't 10 minutes, it was 20 minutes.
Oh,
and
okay.
When we were doing 9 45-minute spots in the German clubs or wherever we were, most groups had 3 45-minute spots, not 9. So we would do 3, and then we'd start again, and then do another 3. Just start from the beginning again, and then we'd start from the beginning again. And so by the time, I would play 3 drum solos, long drum solos a night, and I loved it. It was great fun. There's something on YouTube from the Palace Theatre in New York. And the Palace, I don't know if you know the Palace Theatre, but it was where Count Basie, everybody who was anybody played. And they actually chose that moment. I think it was Rock Palace, or no, it wasn't. Was it Rock Palace? Anyway, I would play. It's a drum solo anyway, a very long one, and I really enjoyed it. But there was a time when everybody in progressive music played a drum solo. You had to, whether you liked it or not. But I liked it.
Yeah. Well, it was a chance for the other members to take a break too. You know?
Well, yeah, not to be too indiscreet, but it was the opportunity to go to the loo.
Right, right, exactly.
And everybody did. I mean, when we were in the Kinks, there was no opportunity to go to the loo, you know, because there was no drum solo.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about working with Roger Daltrey. How did that all come about?
Well, I knew the Who from the earlier days, and we did a gig with the Who with the Roulettes, and I kept in touch. And when Mooney died, there was the opportunity. Well, I took the bull by the horns and got in touch with them and said, "Hey, I was Mooney's favorite drummer. Do you need me for the Who now?" And they said, "No, it's already fixed up." So, but Roger, we got on rather well, of course. But then the interesting thing is, everybody in music in those days got on well. I have no idea whether people don't get on well in the 21st century, but certainly in our day, everybody, you know, we would bump into each other at motorway services or at clubs or in pubs and things, and so we were all very friendly, and we did this thing with Roger, which was one man band. Well, we did a whole album, but one man band was and giving it all away, and that was a great fun to put down, and I was recording with Leo Sayer at the same time, and some of the songs became what were used on both albums. But Roger is a very nice guy. And so anyway, we went to Sweet Silence, which is a recording studio in Copenhagen, and this was with Ringo, and where was I going with this? Well, we had, hang on. Oh, anyway, we were making a record in a foreign country, and that was when Ringo, as in Richie, said, "Call me Richie." But as far as Roger's concerned, we were the recording studio was on Roger's farm, and so we would drive there every day, listen to the music, put it down, and eventually it would come out. And Leo Sayer was one of the people we did in Roger's studio, which had, interestingly enough, to drag it back to the drum thing, the drum kit in the studio, so you didn't have to bring your own, was one of Mooney's, and it was a red glitter Premier, and it sounded great. It sounded like Mooney, come to think of it. Didn't matter who was playing it, it sounded like Mooney.
Yeah, well, another interesting musician that you worked with, Ian Matthews. He's one of my favorite singer-songwriters, both solo and with Matthews Southern Comfort. And I like his take on, you know, country rock, you know, how he performs that so well, you know.
Well, when I joined him, he was living on the West Coast, and he was living in Seattle, and grunge came from Seattle, so he had adapted everything so that it was much more grungy than it had been before. And we were making records that were such fun to work to make, they weren't exactly punk records, but they were pretty close. And we just played the hell out of these songs, and that was it. And I think I made 3 albums with Ian.
Mhm.
I haven't seen him for a while, but we did a French tour with him.
Does he still live in the States? Do you know, or did he move back?
Oh, I don't think he does. At last heard of, he was living in Holland,
Okay, okay,
but I haven't heard from him for a while.
okay. Well, let's move on to your memoir. I want to talk about that. Banging On,
Uh-huh.
aptly named title.
Yes.
Lots of memories there, I'm sure. How long did it take you to write that?
It would be easy for me to say 20 years, but it wasn't. I mean, I began thinking about doing it. I guess, Greg, it took maybe 2 to 3 years.
Mhm.
But I think most books are going to take you that long because there's so much. You have to look up everything, and you have to make sure you're not doing anything silly or saying anything silly.
We'll talk about some of your favorite stories from Banging On. Did you remember?
Okay, yeah, okay, here's one. We were working, it was a Kinks tour, and we were playing in upstate New York at Binghamton. And Binghamton is it's the University of New York. It's SUNY, and we were doing something for SUNY, and I was walking around town, and it's a typical university town. I was walking around and I saw this mum and pop music shop, so I thought, I'll go and have a look, see what they've got. And I went in, and there was only one guy there, and he said, "Can I help you?" I said, "Yeah, I'm looking for drums." He said, "Downstairs." So I went downstairs and discovered a Ringo Ludwig drum kit, complete, the same color, the same everything. And I checked it out, and the only thing that was missing was a bass drum hoop. Somebody had taken the bass drum hoop off. So I went back upstairs, having checked it out, and I said, "That's the grey drum kit or downstairs." I said, "How much is it?" And he said, "Oh, you mean the Ringo?" So I thought, "Oh, blimey, he knows." But I was, he said, it's $50. I said, "I'll buy it. I'll take it." And I sent the road crew in. The drum tech came in, packed it up, and I brought it home. So it was $50. And as I was about to leave the shop, the guy said, "Are you in the Kinks?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Can you get me some tickets for tonight? Can you scalp some?" I said, "Yeah, why not?" So he gave me all the information, and I then started thinking about that particular drum kit. And he said, "By the way," he said, "you could have had it for 25. I could have bought a complete Ringo Starr drum kit for $25.
Okay. Well, any other story
Oh,
that you'd like to retell?
I can tell you about Concrete and Clay.
Okay.
I had just learned a bossa nova, and the way I'd learned the bossa nova was from Downbeat magazine. Had the drum part, so I learned it from there. And when Concrete and Clay came along, I thought, you know what, I can play that bossa nova thing against this, but much more heavily, much stronger. So that's what I did. And then we decided that, or I decided that the intro wasn't really happening. We could do something with that. This was we had a 3-track recorder, I think. It certainly wasn't a 24-track or a 48-track recorder. And so I played a cowbell all the way through, dong, da dong, bion, music, dong, da dong, dong, da dong, and then I found a little bell in the studio, and it was ding. So I played that on the offbeat. So I went dong, ding, dong, 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 ding, dong, dong, and that became the sort of signature of it, and that came about just from being in the studio and looking around and thinking, oh yeah, that could work. So I could then play a bossa nova. And very recently, my son was playing with Russ Ballard. I had long COVID, unfortunately, and so anyway, he was on tour with Russ Ballard, and Russell, we talked about just slipping into songs without telling anybody. And Russell slipped into Concrete and Clay. So I said to Joss, my son, I said, how did you get on? He said, it was easy. I said, what do you mean it was easy? How? It's a bossa nova. He said, I said, how do you know a bossa nova? And he said, it's grade 4 music. Everybody learns it now. So he had learned it years ago in school. I had to work it out for myself, but it's now part of the curriculum that you have to learn a bossa nova.
Really?
So
okay. Interesting. Well, who's Nigel Constable?
Right, Nigel came. Nigel has a checkered career. He is a drummer, but he's been in a completely different world, the world of ATMs. You know what ATMs are? Automatic teller machines. They are money machines,
right?
Cash machines. Anyway, so that's what he was doing, and he got in touch with me, and he said, "Have you written anything about Hayman?" I said, "I've got half a book." He said, "I've got half a book." He said, "We should get together," and that became the Hayman book, and then we did Crash Bang Wallop, and I'm now trying to persuade him. Interestingly enough, nobody has ever written about European drums. Of course, we all know about Trixon and Sonor, but there are dozens of other little companies around Europe that make drums. So I thought somebody should write this, and I had all the notes, and there is a distinct possibility that it will come out. But it's not finished yet, and there's many a slip twixt cup and lip, as they say. Or was it Shakespeare said that? Maybe, who knows?
I think so. I think you're right. Well, yeah, I think it's probably been a good source of information for a lot of people, that want to take up drumming or who are drummers. It's been a real, real encyclopedic, kind of documentation of that, for the drums, and the history of drums.
Well, yes, it's certainly Crash Bang Wallop is talking about the world's drums as we perceived them in Britain, and so we would see all the Ludwig and the Gretsch and the Slingerland and all those, and of course we were very fortunate, and it was in the same way that we would hear American music as if the fat end of the trumpet was on America and the thin end of the trumpet was on Britain.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in America, it was much more segmented than that. It all came through the trumpet to us, but I know from having played with lots of American musicians that they don't have the things that they listened to were not what we were listening to. I mean, we'd be listening to Doris Day because that's what they were playing to us. The radio would be playing, whereas you guys could have proper rock and roll, whereas certainly the BBC wasn't going to play proper rock and roll. That's for sure. But we got on with it, and we learned it, and we made it up, and we got it wrong, and we sent it back to you guys, and it worked.
Hmm. Yeah. Do you remember listening to Radio Luxembourg or Radio Caroline when you were?
Well, Luxembourg was our growing up station. Caroline was the 60s, so it was in 62, 63, 64. But the certainly the Luxembourg stuff was earlier than that, mid 50s.
Yeah.
And because it had been set up for propaganda during the war, and it was in Luxembourg, and so we would distribute this propaganda through the radio, but it wasn't it couldn't be too sophisticated as far as the way they were sending out the music. I think I can't remember the technicalities of it, but it wasn't. It came and went. It couldn't be a very strong signal. It wasn't allowed. Mm-hmm. So music was, you'd hear a little bit, and then it would run it. Then it would go away, and then it'd come back, and then that was how we listened to our music, and we loved it. But there was there was American radio as well, which was the Voice of America, which again had been set up for American servicemen to listen to. So they could listen to jazz, they could listen to rock and roll, but we weren't allowed that from the BBC. Or when I say we weren't, they just didn't have programs for that sort of music.
Yeah, yeah. We'll talk a little bit about when you were owner of your own drum store.
Oh yeah.
Talk some about that.
Yeah, I from going around the world, I was looking at. I would be ducking into drum shops, especially in New York, but obviously in LA as well, and Chicago and Boston. And I'd go into these drum shops, and I'd get excited about what was going on there, because they weren't just selling drums. People were meeting one another, and it was a very good thing to do. So I decided that I'd like to have my own drum shop. So I did, and it was great fun while it lasted. But the nail in the coffin, I think we lasted 6 years. The nail in the coffin was punk, and punk came along, and bless them. I mean, a lot of my friends were punks, or at least were playing punk music, which may not be the same thing. But so these guys they'd come into the shop, and they'd say, "You got any second-hand drum heads?" And we'd say, "No." "Got any second-hand drumsticks?" "No, second-hand is used," for my American neighbors. So they didn't want to buy anything. They didn't want to pay proper money. And we were set up to sell at least 1 or 2 drum kits a week. Otherwise we would go bust. So unfortunately the punks came along, and they didn't buy. And so the shop went bust, which was a great sorrow for all of us, because it wasn't just a drum shop, it was a meeting place. It was, you could learn things, you could see what was new, and anyway. So it was great fun. And of course we had people like Mooney coming in, and Mooney would pull up outside the shop. We had triple yellow lines. I don't know if you know about this, but double yellow lines you can't park on, and triple yellow lines you definitely can't park on. But that didn't stop Mooney, and he came one afternoon, one lunchtime. He said, "Dear boy," he said, "I've got something in the back for you." And he was in the rolls. He opened the trunk of the rolls, and there were dozens of snare drums. He said, "These are for you, dear boy." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I'm giving them to you." I said, "Well, you can't do that, Keith." Anyway, he did. He tried to, and it turns out that they weren't his anyway.
Oh.
He didn't anyway, but he would come in, and he would be. It wasn't my thing, but I used to let him have his head. but you know, he would want to have a drink at sort of 10:30 or 11 o'clock in the day, and so we were friends, and he would pull pranks on me, and he would keep going until I laughed, and it didn't matter what. I mean, I don't know if you know the story of throwing TVs out of the window at the Holiday Inn or whatever it was, or the one in LA or somewhere. He would throw it out, but he didn't just want to throw it out of the window. He wanted it to be working all the way down. So he had to go out and buy extension leads, and had to have leads for the aerial so that it was working all the way down. And that was it. He was, you know, he was a loony, but he was a very creative loony, as you can hear when you listen to his anything he played with the Who.
Well, did you have a sense about Keith, speaking of him, that his light was going to burn out pretty quick, that he probably wouldn't live to be very old? Did you ever have a sense?
Well, I don't think he was ever going to make old bones, if that's what you mean. But that said, whether or not he knew it wasn't going to stop him anyway. It was discovered that he was drinking a bottle of scotch a day, a bottle of whiskey, and the doctor told him that he would last longer if he had a bottle of brandy a day. So of course he immediately switched to brandy. And he used to. I lived just around the corner from him, and he would come home from one of the nightclubs in London, one of the clubs, and it would be 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and he'd knock on my door and he'd say, "Dear boy, what about a cup of tea?" And I would say, "Keith, it's 4 o'clock in the morning." He said, "Yes, well, let's have a cup of tea." And I would have to invite him in, and we'd have a cup of tea. So we had a pretty weird relationship. But I was his favorite drummer, which I was always pleased to be. Yeah. And he was a nice guy. But everybody was nice in those days. I made a record with Bobby Elliott, who was in the Hollies. Right. And we decided that it was time somebody in Britain made a drum solo record. So so we decided we were going to do it. One side was called Drum and Coke, and the other side, and there was it wasn't anything whatsoever to do with drugs. It was drum, and as in rum and coke. And so that was one side. And the other side was, why won't they let us drummers sing? And it was like a music hall song that Bobby Elliott and I put together. And it was about what, you know, it isn't fair to leave us always stuck right at the back, singing softly to ourselves with voices that they lack. So it really was a music hall, a burlesque type song. Mm-hmm. And that didn't come out, surprise. But it was another thing that we were able to do and enjoy ourselves.
Well, one more question I had was, how was the experience being in Count Me In, the documentary?
It was, I had been trying to put a film together since the 80s, and actually did a really good treatment. And we went across to LA, to Hollywood, looking for the money. And we couldn't find the money because we were looking in the wrong places. But it was the whole story was great. And seeing it, anyway, cut to the chase, eventually, we had the opportunity 28 years later, or I say I had the opportunity 28 years later, to do the film. Mm-hmm. And by then things had moved on, people were dead, and it's very expensive. If you're making a film and you use footage of somebody who's dead, it's gonna hit the budget really hard. Yeah. And if you want, for example, Keith Moon, let's say if you want anything like Buddy Holly singing Peggy Sue, that's going to cost you thousands of pounds, and you just can't do that. You can't, you know, the budget will never stand that. So anyway, it was a learning curve, and eventually we did find the money, and the film came out, and it has been well received. And I mean, I wanted to. There is another film in me. That's probably what I'm trying to say, and I want to move the drums along a little bit to. There's a story of Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo, and Napoleon is standing watching the battle, which wasn't going too well for him, of course, and he's watching the battle, and he hears an altercation, and there's a little kid who is being harangued by Napoleon's soldiers, who are going to shoot him because he's a spy. And he said, he's not a spy. He said, well, if you're not a spy, what are you? And he said, I'm a drummer boy. And Napoleon's ears prick up at this, and he says, if you're a drummer, play the command to advance. So the little kid goes diddle-um pum pum, diddle-um pum pum, diddle-um pum pum, which is the command to advance. And he then says to him, so play the command to retreat. And the little kid said, there's no such command in the British Army. And so Napoleon laughs and lets him go. So I wanted to have those sort of stories in it.
Right.
But it's just another film. Who knows whether one day it'll be made. But it's very satisfying to see a film that you've had so much time invested in.
Mm-hmm.
And to see that it actually came out, which of course it did.
Yeah. Well, just, you know, collaborating with all of those drummers that are in that movie. And,
yeah,
you know, I think that's something to be said, to get all those people. I guess a lot of people were you know, excited to be involved in it as well.
Well, that was the idea, Greg. We wanted people to want to be in it, you know.
Right.
I mean, the thing is, there's only 24 hours in a day, and lots of the guys we wanted to use were not available for 24 hours in a day. That's the problem. So in the end, we did get the film made, and it's out there now on Netflix, as you know,
Yeah.
and it was great fun to use to do, and of course my role, other than being in it, was to come up with concepts and work out what we were going to film and how we were going to do it, and so on.
I like the beginning of it too, and throughout the movie, the planetarium is that out in California.
Yeah,
where,
it is. Yeah.
They had all the drummers, you know, inside there, you know, drumming together. I thought that was neat. That was a neat concept.
Yeah. Well, that was always part of the plan, that we would have a drum circle.
Mm-hmm.
So how have we done? What have we?
Yeah, I think we've got a lot of information.
Okay.
I appreciate your time, Bob.
You're welcome, Greg.
And for sharing so much.
Likewise, in your time. Yeah.
Oh,
I don't think anybody. I don't think anybody realizes, Greg, that the job starts now.
Right. Exactly. But it's been rewarding for me, you know, just making these connections and talking to musicians like yourself.
Enjoy yourself. Make yourself a cup of tea before you start.
Right. I've been drinking my coffee here. I don't know if you noticed that.
Okay.
Yeah, been doing that to keep me awake. But
right, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I do appreciate it, Bob, and I will send you the link once I have it edited a little bit.
Okie doke.
Yeah, there's been a little bit of, you know, freezing up, and so I'll have to work on that. But other than that, you know, I think it's going to stand pretty well on its own. So
okie doke, good, great.
Thank you so much, and
welcome.
You have a good. I guess you need to go get something to eat, probably.
Yeah, me too. We're getting fed soon. My daughter is feeding us, so that's good.
All right. Put her to work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Well, you know where I am if you need any corroboration or anything.
Okay. Okay. If I need any alibis, I can go to you, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm standing by. Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Bob, and we'll be in touch.
Okay. Peace and love. See ya.